I had a very, very rough prototype. It looked terrible. I don't think we had a website up. We didn't really have much brand. We knew what the name was. But it's never too early to start pitching because all you're going to do is learn. You can't be afraid of no.
Yeah.
It's important to think about investors just like customers. You need experience talking to them. And so the more quickly you can get those reps in, the better.
Welcome to the Marketing Meeting podcast. Today I'm joined by Carter Fowler, the founder of Totem and Carter Fowler Creative. Does that still exist, Carter? The
Um,
creative part?
Legally, it does. Existentially, maybe not so much. These days, everything in my life is Totem. It begins with T and ends with M, every aspect.
Yeah. And Carter is a brand builder, an entrepreneur who recently raised a fund with Totem. And so today we'll just dive into how he's built the brand, what's working, the lessons learned along the way. Welcome, Carter.
Thank you so much, Iter. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. I'm very excited.
The nice thing is that the last time that we met, it was about 2 years ago, and there
Yes.
was nothing related to Totem, as far as I know. I mean, maybe you didn't tell me, but but it was a completely different world, and it's the same for me. And now here
hmm
you have a brand in your hands, which is growing, which is getting funds, and I would love to learn what worked and what didn't work along the way.
hmm
So, what was the inspiration that took you to create Totem?
Yes. So, I mean, going back 2 years, I think Totem may have existed in another mind that wasn't my own to an extent at that point. But around 2 years ago, shortly after you and I talked for the first time, I believe, was the first time I met the man who would become my co-founder at Totem, Chase Lemons. So, my background is all in marketing and go-to-market and brand. Chase is a big product development guy and has been since the very beginning. His background is actually in chemical engineering and then moved into the kind of chemical formulation world, then into electronics, was in algorithmic trading for a while before we connected. But Chase and I met each other while we were both consulting for another startup. And this was 2 years ago. It was a medical device company. Chase was leading all the product development and I was leading all the go to market. And we're very different people, very different personalities, but we do share a sense of humor. And that was the thing that bonded us initially. And, something about Chase is he's one of those guys that always has things that he's working on in his own time. And I'm sure you've met someone like this in your past because I had as well. They're always a hit at the party because they have some kind of cool thing they've been working on, and everybody always reacts, "Oh my God, that's amazing. You should sell it. You would make millions." Right? And Chase's response to that always was, it's much more difficult to commercialize a product than just like from a cool concept like this than I think you understand. And that's just not the kind of the core skill set that Chase has. But one day after work, we were kind of had our feet kicked up on the desk, and he was walking me through just some gadgets and things he'd been working on in his own spare time. And he told me this story about his very first ever music festival. And this caught my ear because I come from a long family of musicians, like generations of musicians. In fact, even some of from earlier in my career, some of my journalism writing was archived by the US Library of Congress, specifically about music. Um, but this is not something that Chase and I necessarily had in common. And so when he told me about this music festival experience, I was so excited. But that first day at EDC Orlando in 2019, Chase had his phone stolen. And, there's about 300,000 people that attend this festival in Orlando every year. It's massive. And, Chase is, as we like to say, even in our pitch deck, I specialize in finding friends at festivals and Chase specializes in getting lost at festivals. So, Chase, had his phone stolen within a couple hours, lost his group in the crowd, and then there he was, all alone. He'd never been in an environment like this before. And he was looking around at all of these people wearing various, light up jewelry and accessories and thinking to himself in classic Chase fashion, not even really paying too much attention to the set. I think I could make two of those bracelets that are lighting up on everyone's wrists, but you could pair them with each other, and a light would revolve around the bracelet and point at its peer at any time. And this could work without cell service or internet connection or Wi-Fi or anything. And when he told me this, he told me a couple of other ideas before, but he mentioned that to me and I just stopped him in his tracks. And I was like, wait, let me just get this straight. You think you know how to make a bracelet that can work without any cell service or internet connection whatsoever and can always point to its peer and just tell you the direction to walk? I said, yeah, I think so. I've got it all kind of scoped out in my head. And my response was, well, I don't need to hear any of the other ideas. I would buy that in a heartbeat. I think a lot of other people would as well. I think I know why they would. And I would love to take that to market with you after this project is completed that we're working on. So that was, late summer 2023. We began working on the product and, going through prototypes. Very quickly, we left the bracelet idea behind because it just wasn't that great of a user experience. Just on a basic level, of course, if you think about how you might hold your arm to when you're navigating with it, the light when you're walking that direction would always be on the opposite side of the wrist. So you couldn't necessarily keep an eye on it. And two, just from my background in go-to-market and marketing, I understand that when you're bringing a new product, especially if it's based on new technology to market, it makes your life so much easier if you lean on things people already understand, and you can kind of pull that background context from them already to shorten the learning curve about your product. So what is one thing that everyone in the world, regardless of economic status or culture, knows about? The compass, right? It's one of the most ancient forms of technology that we have today, and people still use it. And so we started putting these ideas two and two together because if you think about it, how many words could you use to describe this bracelet that helps you find your people? Maybe if we worked really hard on it, we could get it down to maybe 6 or 7 words. And that would be the best that we could do. But because everyone in the world knows what a compass is, all they need to understand is this is like a compass, but instead of pointing you to an objective place like north, it points you to a subjective place. Basically more like Captain Jack Sparrow's compass from Pirates of the Caribbean, right? It points you to what you want most in the world, as long as what you want are the people that you love. And so that allowed us to shorten it down to friend finding compass, which, if you can describe a brand new tech product in 3 words and it just clicks and everybody understands exactly what it does, wow, it's going to make your life so much easier. So early last year, we were in our early prototyping phase. And we kind of decided on the form factor, but one thing we wanted to make sure was that it would always remain a wearable, just like that bracelet, because we wanted it to feel like jewelry, feel like something that could be a part of your experience, not just some product you need to lug around with you, and actually be very beautiful and eye-catching for others.
Amazing. So, did you use, what type of a budget did you start this process? Because I
Yes,
think there's some nice things to talk about there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we started this with practically zero budget. The budget was myself and Chase's experience and skills. Because, we had the in-house ability to build product and market product, which is so, so helpful. So to this date, we have still never spent any money external on R&D or product development. Everything has been done in-house, which is a huge competitive advantage for us. But precisely because we weren't beginning this with deep pockets, we weren't beginning this with a bunch of investor connections. I know you mentioned our pre-seed round that we've closed. We raised a little over $1.3 million. Only 2 of the 24 investors in that round did I know before this. And one I'd met very recently. So, we didn't have the connections. We didn't have the massive account, $500,000 in savings to start this. And so I learned a very important lesson from studying the founder of Liquid Death. I'd listened to a couple of interviews from him and about the importance of, if you don't have that kind of budget, then you need to make a product that can effectively market itself, that can spread organically. The product needs to help you with marketing if you're not going to spend on marketing. So that was a big reason why we wanted to make it a wearable, why we wanted to make it so eye-catching, and why we worked very hard early on in the product strategy process to incorporate as many organic network effects into this device to help it spread quickly. So,
Mhm.
a little bit about the device. It doesn't require any cell service or internet connection. All it needs is a line of sight to the sky. Between two of them, the range goes around 2/3 of a mile, but everyone in the area, even if you don't know them, just acts as a node in our mesh network and extends your range. So when you think about it like that, and of course it's peer to peer, it's about bringing people together. So there's several layers of network effects that we worked into the product design itself, how the product performs, and even our pricing.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
on one hand, it's kind of the opposite of a phone. The more phones you get in a place, the worse they all work. The more totems you get in a place, the better they all work. So, like, the more totems in an area, the more valuable they become and the better they perform. Second, they only increase in value to you as a user the more of your friends that you know that have one, right? Just owning one in and of yourself, the best you can do with that is find north and look great, which
Mhm.
are both valuable use cases, but it's even better to actually find your friends. So, very few people ever buy one. Like our average cart size is 4 totem compasses.
Mhm.
And so, it just gets more valuable the more of your friends that you can convince to get one. And then we also roped that into our pricing strategy from the beginning as well, where as you buy more, they get more affordable, just to encourage that adoption. Because we always knew that if we nailed the design and we got those network effects right, once people were wearing them in the real world, it would naturally spread because they're such a great conversation starter. In my
Mhm.
experience going to a music festival, at least 5 to 7 people approach you every hour and ask
Mhm.
what that thing is on your neck,
Oh.
because it's just so eye catching. Especially
Mhm.
as the lights go down, it just draws all of the attention. So that was a huge, huge focus for us. We just never expected those organic network effects to take off before people even had it in the real world or had ever even seen it in the real world, like it did last year when we went viral for the first time in February.
Those, I'll stop you there because I have a question. Just like a step
Mhm.
by step, because you had a great idea and you started developing the product. There is like the product design decisions that you made, which are great. You explained them perfectly. What did you do in the meanwhile? Like, finding the name of the brand, building a website. How
Mhm.
did it all start? Like, what did you do step by step in terms of brand building, not the product design itself only?
Yeah, the brand itself. So, man, I'll go back to the early days. So, the original idea for the name Totem, maybe that's a good place to start. So, Totem has a meaning within the festival world and the festival, with festival goers themselves. A totem, refers to it's an allusion to the totem poles, that we all know and love all around the world from indigenous societies. But in music festivals around the world, a totem is a large thing that people carry around with them in the crowd so their friends can see it and find them among the masses of people.
Hmm.
So oftentimes it's, like an extendable rod with some hilarious snippet, like a meme on the top, some snippet from a show. Sometimes it's a light up teddy bear on top. Who knows? It could be any number of things that your group identifies with. And because it had, it was just another layer of leaning on knowledge that people already have in the space to make explaining it simpler. So
Hmm.
anyone who knows that about the space, when they hear it's called the totem compass, those two things, they can just kind of intuit what it does. So it began with the name. We did play for a while with calling it something far more literal, Fest Compass, because we thought it might be a little bit more friendly for international users, who because Fest is a pretty it carries or it holds its definition among a
Hmm.
lot of different languages. But once we settled in on Totem, we worked this whole brand around appealing to and kind of personifying, really illustrating the environment within which it was designed to be used. So,
Hmm.
our original use case and the core was music festivals, often happening at night. So, it had a dark background aesthetic. We had a lot of colors, pink, indigo, purples that kind of mimic the lights and the lasers you may see in these settings. And then the really fun process began getting into the logo. I designed all of the brand myself. We used no external people, and this is what was so important in allowing us to do this without a budget, because Chase
Mm-hmm.
could prototype and develop these things himself. It was just his time. And I've been doing this for years for clients, building their brand and going through brand strategy. So getting into the logo, the brand mark was actually very fun because we played with a lot of different ideas, but it all kind of came back to this idea of the crystal. The crystal in the middle of this compass here was the one most common theme throughout the entire process. When I met Chase, he had a prototype of a beacon, which was just a crystal that he had printed out, and was like, man, I think people would love to wear this because who doesn't love crystals? So we spent so much time on the design of the crystal itself because it's in the product, but it's also in the brand. And the brand contains the visual of the product contains the brand. It's this whole kind of infinity mirror effect cascading down. So we must have gone through 40 iterations of the crystal itself. And it looks very simple when you see it now, right? But you can see it has four aspects here. And even within it, it has the facet makes a T shape, right? And so that's the exact shape that we took to use for the T in Totem in the language. The O in the brand mark is an abstract representation of the product itself. It is a colored circle with a smaller colored circle inside it, and then the crystal in the middle of it. And then, of course, within the crystal here, you can collect your four friends into the four facets. And so it's like the product is in the brand is in the product, the T is in the crystal's in the name. Like it's all this kind of cascading effect because we wanted it to seem totally seamless, the entire experience.
How about like were you able to get the trademarks easily for the logo? It should be easier, but for the name
Mhm.
itself, because Totem is a name that is so frequently used, and at this time in 2024, it should be hard to get the trademarks, right?
Yes, yeah. So I was actually very surprised that we could get the Totem Inc. Just in the first place to incorporate
Uh-huh.
the company under that name. We felt like that was a huge win.
Yeah.
And thus far, most of our trademarks have been around things outside of Totem, because if you look up Totem online, there are a lot of other examples out there. So most of our IP is related to more specific things than the name Totem itself. But I am happy to share that due to all of our very hard marketing work over the last year, we are now top 3 on Google through SEO for the word totem, which we thought would take much longer time. So we're climbing there.
So I'll move on from the branding to the website and then to
Mm-hmm.
SEO and those type of things. How did that
Yes.
process go? Did you do the website also yourself?
Yes, I did it all myself as well. All the messaging, all of the copy, all of the naming. I mean, the messaging is so important for us. Even just how we refer to the things on the product, we've created our own colloquial language for everybody. So, when it's hanging on your chest like this, we call this vibe mode. And customers have adopted this. They're like, I love wearing it and just vibing around. And so it like working these things into it, our own colloquial language. This is not a button, this is the touch crystal, right?
Okay.
Like the language we refer to it is so important, and we've been highly precise. Even this ring that goes around it, we don't call it, a dial or a ring, we call it the halo.
Okay.
And so, the language has been so important, and really stripping down the feature set, like kind of the marketing drove a lot of our product decisions early on. I know how important it is to be able to explain how to use something in 3 steps on a website, right? You want that
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, here's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And because we kind of confined our explanation to that, it limited the feature set quite significantly and made the product much simpler and more intuitive for people. So, we was bond with your tribe, find your tribe, and then vibe with your tribe. And
Mm-hmm.
the bonds is a whole very important thing as well, because if you think about it, this is all about human relationships. That's the reason why
Mm-hmm.
anyone cares about this. And so when you bond with someone and you're tracking your bonds, we use that language very specifically. So when it comes to websites, once you have the design aesthetic down, your general brand guidelines, I'm a firm believer that you need to get the messaging in place first. The
Mm-hmm.
information, the copy, the content, that informs the design. The design should be formed around that rather than in the opposite. For many years as a consultant, when I was, doing web strategy and web design for clients, you see that that's not the norm. The way it goes usually when you hire a consultant to build a website is they might do some brand strategy work for you, help you build your brand guidelines, and then they design the website and then you fill it in with what you want it to say. That's the complete other, it's the wrong way. It's your beginning at the end. You need to begin with the words because words are what sell things.
Mhm,
Getting your words right is the most important thing, and then you can build the design around it.
mhm.
So, once we kind of built out that language, then I built the whole website myself on Webflow, which is my favorite tool for building websites. You can do really amazing, dynamic, animated things on there without really needing to get too deep into the code.
Mhm. I'll, uh, I'm a firm believer of making the copy first and the messaging first, and then
Yes.
talking about, okay, how is the creatives looking like? Which photo are we going to use? I'm with you on that. By the way, there's like a background click. Is it the totem making a sound on the back? I just want to make sure that our sound is okay.
I'll put my pen down and we'll see if that fixes the
You
clicking
have a pen.
sound. Yes.
Okay, that's good. I wonder if it was totem making a sound.
No, the totem doesn't make a sound. It listens to sounds, and that does this great sound react
Oh,
here, which is basically the money maker.
okay.
Everybody,
There's an
yeah,
audio. Okay, wow,
yes. So
wow.
that's what it's doing here. It's vibing to the sounds around it, which is very important because people, you know this concept I'm going to get at here because you're an amazing skilled marketer yourself. I use this metaphor with a lot of clients in the past to help them understand something important, which is if your neighbor goes and buys a brand new Mercedes, right, and it's sitting out in the driveway, you go out and talk to him and you ask him why he bought that car. He's going to list out all of these reasons. Oh, the handling was great. I love the color. It gets great gas mileage. You should sit in the interior. But these are all just justifications that they've worked out after the fact to explain why they made the purchase because we all feel like we need some rational explanation for things like this. We know the real reason he bought that new Mercedes. It was emotion. It was about status,
Mhm.
and so to the same extent with this product, people, talk about the main reason they bought it was because they need to find their people, whether it's their children, their friends. But I think the bigger reason why they bought it, that's why that's how they justify it. But the much bigger reason is because it looks beautiful. It just looks really cool. And you
Yeah.
can wear it like this and it just accents everything. So emotion drives purchasing behavior more for customers than logic. And that's the power of design.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's just not like the other day I was just commenting on one of the posts of Clay, and I said, I mean, it's not always problems to be solved. A brand is not about that only because we are sometimes so stuck. Okay, what's the problem to be solved? We need to message that. Yeah, for
Mm-hmm.
sure, but it's not always problems to be solved. There's no reason that you buy the third black boot in one winter.
Yes.
It's just like there's no problem in there, but you just create some, justifications in your mind because you like
Yes.
the other boot better than the second boot, something like that. Anyway, so there's an important thing that I recognize because usually, oftentimes, with the new product development and getting right funds and so on,
Mm-hmm.
there's a tendency in the startups ignoring the branding part or like not ignoring but postponing the branding and marketing part a little bit towards the other phases, and then
Mm-hmm.
making something scrappy because just make sure that you have an initial product that you can showcase to the investors so that you can get some funding, and with that funding money you can do branding and marketing. I see that you did like product design, product development and marketing hand in hand,
Yes.
which is not always the case for many of the startups, and I
Mm-hmm.
understand that you've seen a lot of value in that.
Yes, I think it's maybe our greatest unfair competitive advantage is how product and marketing have worked hand in hand throughout the entire lifespan of this company and will forevermore.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's really important. A lot of startups get pulled off base. Like you said, they get so hyper focused on the problem and their solution. and making sure that it's something that people can justify buying. But to really create a movement and create something that people are passionate about and want to share with other people, because of course, if you can unlock that desire, people want to share it, then it's going to make your whole life so much easier. To do that, you need something more than people, or you need something more than just something for people to buy. You need something for people to buy into.
Yeah.
And so that's where a story, that's where a brand comes in. And I think a lot of founders get pulled off base because that doesn't just apply to customers, that applies to investors as well. You know, it has to be a pretty wild product solving a huge problem, and they probably need to know you earlier as a founder um, for you to be able to get funding just on that, right? But we didn't have those deep connections. So we needed to build a brand and a story that had something for people to get excited about, had something for people to follow along with, and an ethos for them to buy into. You know, if you get your branding down at the beginning, then it makes such a big impact on your marketing down the road because you get compound interest off of every single post, every single campaign you make, because it's all building from a central, consistent place, and that is your brand identity.
How about the community part of things, or like, building the community and so on? When did you start that? Did you start that after you have the product in hand and you have the website and so on? What was the kickoff time for that?
Oh no, yeah. If you're waiting until your website is up and your product is ready to engage the community, then you're making a very big mistake. Because otherwise, how could you know that you're building the right thing? So the very first thing before we actually made our social media accounts, a little while before the website was even up. And the reason was we weren't even posting. We had to post something so people kind of knew what we were, but it was mainly just to have conversations, and do customer research during the early days from October to January. So October 2023 to January 2024, I probably spent at least 3 hours a day, every day, just talking to people in this space about their experience, how they think about this problem, memories, stories that they've had. And the important thing when you're going through that is to not bring up your product. It is not about your product. It is about them. The second you start bringing up your product and asking questions about that, they will give you leading dishonest answers because we all want to make people happy and we want to please them. And so they will start telling you what they think you want to hear. So I think that was actually a huge role in setting the stage for us to have that viral glow up, starting last February, which has continued even through last week, a year later, was because when that initial post went up that ended up doing like 45 million views online, we only had about 600 followers online, but I would say half of those I had talked to for hours. And so they all felt connected with it, and I had learned so much from them about how they would like to use this and the ways that it would help their lives.
And then you did this customer interviews before you start posting anything then in that case.
Exactly.
And were you
Yeah.
like showing a product to them or just explaining the concept?
Primarily not. Yeah, we talked about this idea that we were working on, because they need to understand that to have a reason to talk to you and open up. But then ideally, that's the last mention of the product from there. It's just talking to them about, how do you get lost? What are your pain points in these areas? What's important to you? Because we could have made it something that was bigger and heavier, that could go a week on a battery charge. There were a lot of design decisions to make, and you just don't, you can kind of work around it a bit if you're targeting the right market for yourself. So something I'd say a lot is, people talk so much about product market fit, but far more important than that is founder market fit. Are you the right person to bring this product to this market? Because that's the most important thing. And it allows you to shorten the timeline in this learning because you can, to an extent, do customer research just by writing in your own journal because you are in that segment. And so it makes things easier, but that can only take you so far. And so the customer research, all of these conversations over and over again were very important. But of course, you need to take them all with a grain of salt because a lot of those conversations I had early on, especially with, experts in the space and investors, told me that this was a dumb idea. The customers didn't think that that was the case, but many people who you would classically pay more attention to said no one wants another piece of hardware. No one wants something to lug around with them. Why are you targeting festivals with this? I think the real market for this is defense applications. You need to be pursuing, grants from the government, etc. But the answer is, well, this is the market I know. And so we're going to focus on what we know because I don't know anything about the defense industry. Maybe I could learn it in 3 years, enough to sell at a mediocre level. But we know this space, and that has proven very effective for us because it allowed us to get all of this traction. And now we're in a position where we can make intentional steps into other markets from this beachhead that we've established.
And I think very importantly is that since you know your target market very well at the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
you were able to craft the message, craft the logo, and do the namings like this is the wipe mode, this is this mode, this is like a
Mm-hmm.
halo. I mean, what if you decide to target both festivals and also military or security type of things? Then
Yeah.
what's the message there? I mean, would you say halo to the soldiers
Yeah.
or so, or in a
No
security
chance.
problem? So it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that from here onwards you might want to pivot to another direction, but at least you are now building a brand based on a very clear understanding of the audience, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
after you spoke with these people, and then you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned about a post that went viral. Was it the
Yes.
first post, or what type of a post is that? And
I
why
think
it
it
went viral?
was. Yes, that is the question everybody asks. Why? How can I do it for myself? What is the recipe? So I think it was actually maybe our seventh or eighth post
Uh-huh.
online. And the interesting thing about like a company like this is your definition of viral changes over time.
Mhm.
We had one post, this was, I think our fifth one, that did 100,000. And oh man, that was so exciting for us. And it was like, wow, we've really got something here. But so to take us back, this was about 2 or 3 weeks before South by Southwest, the Creative Industries Expo in 2024. We had gotten accepted into their startup village there, which was super exciting. That was the moment when we thought the world would find out about the Totem Compass for the first time. I'd actually applied for that before we even incorporated the company because I know the importance, like what we were saying earlier, you need something for people to buy into. It's not just about a brand, but a story as well, right? You need like these points, these central plot points, especially in your first year or two of a company, to really build this compelling story. And I knew that product debut at the world's largest music and tech conference was perfect for us. So, here we were about 3 weeks before South by Southwest. Again, we still had maybe 50 subscribers to our newsletter, Totem Tuesday, and then maybe we had 500 something followers on Instagram. I think this was our only account at the time, probably. Well, here I was getting ready to go to this big conference. We're a tiny little startup with two full-time co-founders and no real funding. We did get a one $10,000 check from an investor just to help us cover the cost of travel and lodging to South by Southwest.
And any team
And
members other than you and your co-founder?
so not at the moment when this went viral, but within those 3 weeks, we did have team members because we needed them. So I had been, we're getting ready for South by, thinking through everything for the booth, explaining this to everybody. I've never been to a conference this big before. I'm very nervous. And I realized, well, like we have a great website, but we need a homepage video for South by Southwest, of course, And so I went to produce this myself, built the whole thing. And that Friday, when I finished, published it on the website. I just took one clip from that homepage video and threw it up on Instagram without much of a thought. Simple, simple video. It's just my hand over my desk at home. We didn't even have an office at this point with 3 prototypes. 2 of them are on the desk and I'm just rotating it. And it's just a demo. Like it's just 2 lights on it pointing at those other 2. and it's about 6 seconds long, and all it says is friend finding compass for festivals. That's it. Incredibly simple, this post. I went to sleep, didn't think much of it, woke up the next morning, went to the gym, etc. Around 3 p.m., I opened Instagram, and it was I the emotions in that moment. It was so insane. To take you back to that, like I said, we had about 500 followers. That next day when I logged on, we had about 30,000, and it was growing quickly.
Oh God.
We had thousands of DMs. That post had over, I think now it has maybe around 40,000 comments on this, right? And it's exciting. It's also terrifying. Like, considering the fact that this many people are all coming on there, it's hard to even conceptualize that these are individual human beings. And so, every time logging on the account, I had never seen this before, and I realized how novel of an experience this is. If you have more than 99 notifications, or hundreds of notifications or DMs on Instagram, when you log in, it just says 99, 99, 99 across it. And so usually, some of us might be able to experience that if you had a big Instagram account and didn't check it for a few months, right?
Yeah.
But this was every time I would open Instagram, even if it was 2 minutes later, it would be all 99s across as well. And it was flooding in. Our website was breaking. Our waitlist spreadsheet was coming apart. Like, we literally didn't have enough bandwidth to handle the traffic on the website. And it was chaos. At the time, it was just me and Chase. And Chase isn't going to be over there, answering comments on Instagram. That's not his role. And all of a sudden, I basically had what had turned from a concept and an early stage startup to a company almost overnight. And so we needed to run all of these things because we just gone from, we put up our wait list 3 days before this on the website before it went viral. And thank God that we did, because we were able to capture that moment. And that really kickstarted things for us, because that was about 2.5 weeks before South by. We made our first employee hire the week of South by. I onboarded her that Monday, and her first job was to book our flights to Austin because we're going to South by Southwest on Thursday. And so, we had to scale incredibly quickly, because all of a sudden there were tens of thousands of people all around the world who considered themselves our customers, despite the fact that it was just a wait list and, we hadn't taken any funds yet. And so we were in this interesting position with massive international demand. This had spread, because anything that spreads organically and virally like that, it crosses countries, demographics, interests. Like, it just becomes a natural phenomenon. And we needed to scale incredibly quickly to meet that demand, because it happened before we even had a fully functioning product.
Yeah, but at that time, what were the things that were ready? You said like the website, the wait list, and your Instagram account, and you have like a newsletter as well, which
Yes.
would, like, people who are on the wait list can probably are auto sign, right?
Yes, that was pretty much all of our marketing assets. You hit it. That was pretty much it. We had a YouTube channel that we published our homepage video on, and that was it. The newsletter was actually the first thing.
Sorry to cut your words. Sorry, just
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, the newsletter was maybe the first piece of marketing that we did. We started that in early November, and that was just to give people something to follow, because we knew that, hopefully we could raise investment for this at some point. People want to see progress. They want to see a story. And so that's where the idea for Totem Tuesday came about. And that was the very first piece of marketing that we did. And I think the first Totem Tuesday got sent out to 11 people. But the concept has stayed the same the entire time. Every week, we've been doing this for about 18 months now. We share 3 things we accomplished, 2 things we learned, 1 thing to look forward to. And that's kind of been the hub of it all for us. It brought us almost all of our investment for the pre-seed round. It, inspired trust and familiarity among our customer base when we were going through all the pains of trying to roll out a brand new tech product to tens of thousands of people all around the world, and all the hiccups and unexpected bends in the road of that. It was the gift that kept on giving, and we wouldn't be here today without it.
Yeah, and then you should drop your pencil.
Yes.
I'm sorry. No, then because my editor then later on hammers me, okay, you should have told us.
Thank you. I'm going to put it out of sight.
No, no, I'm just messing. Like, I'm just like, mine is very far away from me.
Yeah.
One question: what would
Hmm.
you have if you knew that you were going to go viral?
Yes.
What would you have done differently
Ooh,
before? Like, is there anything that you would have made ready?
that's a really interesting question. I'm probably going to need a moment to think about it. No one has ever asked me that before. So if I knew we were going to go viral when we did, what would I have had ready? Um, I certainly would have had frequently asked questions to the product on the website and a bit more just content to explain it because immediately there was so much speculation online about whether this could even exist, which maybe that came to benefit us. You know, I recently learned all about Red Bull's founder and how he kind of actually encouraged those myths. I don't know if you remember this back in the day when people were all spreading myths that Red Bull actually maybe contained like bull semen. Do you remember this back in the day? There's like
Some
this
people
cult.
might want that. I mean, like the bulls thing is known
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
phenomenon.
But it
Yeah,
was this like urban
I didn't know
legend,
that.
and Red Bull actually fed this. They didn't create this, but they fed this, and so maybe some of the speculation actually served us. But I do know it would have made things simpler if we had at least some FAQs on the website, and if we had not just a wait list, but had a way for people to actually pre-order, because all that we were taking from people was your name, your email, and then with this projected pricing up here, how many do you think you will like? And so that was great. I mean, we got about 30,000 emails in about a week. But then, of course, the challenge became now, how do we actually convert these to pre orders? And then from there, how do we then actually turn this into revenue? Right. So those were a couple of things.
How did you turn them into pre-orders? Is there anything specific that you did?
With
Some might
great,
work,
with
some might not. I don't know.
Yes, with great difficulty. There was probably a much better way to do this, but we couldn't really figure it out because all we had was a bunch of emails and names. And we didn't want to just send everyone an email and ask them to go to a link to do this. You know, like that's too much friction. You're going to have a lot of dropped conversion there. And we knew that probably long term, you know, we were going to be selling on e-commerce. We didn't have a online store set up yet. And so we knew that we would probably go into Shopify long term and ended up looking at, is there any way to run this through Shopify? Shopify is not exactly made to do pre-orders or pre-sales, but we found a company that has an app add-on that's called Submarine that is used to doing kind of similar like pre-sale things for Mattel in the past and some other big companies. And it was a kind of a complicated process merging that in through Submarine, actually giving everybody a link because what we wanted to do, the ideal was send an email out to everybody, have them click the link and it already pre-populated with their order info, right? Make it as simple as possible. And this is a pretty complicated thing to pull off in digital marketing. And I still remember the day that we sent it out with all that custom code in that email with that link going on and just like praying that it would work for everybody. And then sitting back and watching as the orders rolled in very triumphantly. It was great.
Are your customers like usually like, is it B2B customers or do you also have like direct B2C customers buying for their friends, from their families,
Mm-hmm.
and so on?
Thus far, all of our sales have been straight direct to consumer. People buying them to use with their friends, with their families. And, the interesting thing was people bought it for so many purposes that we didn't originally expect. Obviously, we designed this for music festivals, but since then, people have bought it for many, many new alternative use cases: skiing, snowboarding, vacations, hiking, camping, cruise lines, using with the kids, especially before they hit that 13 age where you want to have a smartphone in their hands.
Yeah.
Um, but it's all been direct to consumer thus far. But this year, opening into the B2B channels is going to be really, really big for us. And we have a couple of very large deals coming down the pipeline to get that kind of more immediate distribution right into the customer's hands through partners.
But then, since you are also switching to B2B now, are you changing anything in your branding, on your website, or is it like on the backstage things are happening?
It's yeah, it's on the backstage. We don't really because people see the consumers want this and the consumers love this. So then the businesses come to us because they say, I have access to that consumer base. That's how it
Yeah.
originally started with all of our partners. We had festival organizers and people in entertainment from around the world, especially internationally, that saw the post go viral and said, I want to bring that to my country, or I want to sell the people, I want to sell that to my attendees at my event.
When was the first, coming back to the funding part, when was the
Yes.
first investment, let's say, pitch that you
Yeah.
do? Because that's the verbiage around it.
I would say the first pitch was 3 months before we incorporated the company. And all of the early feedback was very, very skeptical. This is not kind of the classic consumer hardware is not the sexiest thing for tech investors. It's a hard thing to pull off developing a tech product like this that's based on hardware and distributing it to consumers, especially with an international customer base. So all the feedback early on, as I mentioned earlier, was very skeptical, got very little traction. People kind of viewing it as like a flippant thing, not too serious. It's for music festivals. People who go to music festivals aren't even that serious of people. It's pretty like this is too simple of a problem to solve, getting lost. Why not do it with an app? So I think I pitched maybe the first 12 in a row and got resounding rejections every single time. But we just kept going and kept seeding that Totem Tuesday newsletter every week to those people so they could watch our progress. And then, of course, it came down to the reason we were able to get that first check in the door was because we had something big coming up that could be big for the company, and that was South by Southwest. And that was the reason for that first check to come in. And again, it was just enough to cover our like travel and lodging, but it was something substantive for someone to invest in that if it went well, of course, this could result in a great return.
Do you think that you done those investor pitches a bit earlier in the process? Like, was the product ready, the website, the branding, and everything was ready when you do those pitches?
Not when I began. I had a very, very rough prototype. It looked terrible. I don't think we had a website up. We didn't really have much brand. We knew what the name was. But it's never too early to start pitching because all you're going to do is learn. You can't be afraid of no.
Yeah.
I sometimes hear people advising others to, well, don't go and talk to the VC yet until you know exactly what your ask is going to be or until your deck is done. You don't want to sour the first impression, but there's always someone else out there. And the more reps you get, the better you'll get, the quicker you get. So, it's important to think about investors just like customers. You need experience talking to them. And so the more quickly you can get those reps in, the better. I don't really regret any of it, although it was very demoralizing at the time.
Two questions on that. So I think not 2 points on that. One of them is that I like the way that you followed up with the Totem Tuesday newsletters, that so that
Yeah.
those people can see your progress, although
Yeah.
they don't like it at the first time. That's, I think,
Hmm.
amazing. But the other thing is, so for now, for example, when you pitch to an investor, what are the things that you think really works? Is it the
Like these
deck?
days, currently?
Yeah, these days, because you have so many
Yeah.
things ready right now. What are the things that impresses them a lot?
It's all about the story, really. If you're relying on your deck to raise money, you're going to have a tough time. The deck is maybe the least important part of it all. In fact, I think most of our pre-seed round was raised from people. Of course, they wanted to see the deck before they made their final decision, but most of them made their decision, like I mentioned earlier, based off of watching this and feeling that this was a team who was on a task to do something, or was on a mission and was going to do something big. Just because we proved it with the work and with the progress. How many people do you know during that early of a stage that take time to put together a thorough long newsletter filled with all kind of details every single week.
Yeah.
I think for that first year, I probably spent 4 hours every single Tuesday. And that's a lot of time when there's just two people on the team and this is the CEO doing it. So, the story is the most important thing. Getting your pitch down, understanding who you're talking to and what things to emphasize. After that first conversation, they get about 60% there and kind of know whether they're going to invest or not. Then they're just looking for reasons to back out. And so that's the role of the deck. That's the role of the details and the materials, is just to show them that you have done the thinking, you have covered the details, and just make sure that they don't get any reasons to back out. But that doesn't get them to yes. That just gets them to not come off of yes, off of the initial interaction.
With the investments that you are, fundings that you are getting, are what like I'm not going to ask what's the amount, of course, but the amount that you're going to allocate to marketing with the
Sure.
investments that you get, where are they going to allocate? Are you going to allocate them to? Which levers, let's say, are you going to allocate them to? Do you know them?
Yes. So our pre-seed round we raised on a rolling basis over the last year to kind of get us to this state where we were shipping product. And so we're opening our seed round in April. And a lot of that will go toward product, of course, but we are planning to invest in marketing. The interesting thing about this, though, is that everything that we've done so far with marketing has been done with such a lean team and nearly no budget whatsoever until this point. We've still to this day spent less than $2,000 in ads in the whole lifetime of the company. And we generated about 130 million views on social media last year alone and with practically no ad budget. So we want to keep feeding what works, feeding the community, making it very shareable. We don't plan for advertising to ever be a big part of this for us. Um, Especially over the last year, have come to feel very strongly that advertising is the cost that you pay for making a undifferentiated and or mediocre product. If you're having to advertise it, then that means that people aren't willing to talk about it themselves, and you want to make something that's worth talking about. So most of our marketing investment will probably be related to things for our community, and potentially working with more influencers and content creators, because this next step we're making with our marketing is based on some learnings that we found through talking with our customers over the last few months. And that's expanding into focusing or expanding to cover the families and parents market, because about 10 to 15% of our pre-order customers, as we learned over the last few months, were parents who bought it to use with their kids. And that's pretty interesting. If you look at our marketing online, it's pretty sexy. Like there's like lasers and lights, and women in bodysuits. And, I'm even out there sometimes wearing a full bodysuit myself.
I saw
Um,
it.
and yeah, you look at this and you say, this does not make me think of something I need for my 7-year old. But nonetheless, of our, 24,000 units that were pre-ordered, about 3,000 of them were pre-ordered for that purpose. And so we were hopping on calls with these parents to understand their psychology and what led them to this, because we're a young team here at Totem. I have a lot of marketing experience, but I don't have any kids. I'm the second oldest guy here and I'm 32. There are no kids on this team. In fact, no one has any children. And this is a segment that we wanted to learn about. And the interesting thing was almost none of those parents said anything about festivals. They were talking about using them for everyday purposes, amusement parks, trips with the kids. So as we expand into that market, that's probably where we'll be leaning on external partners much more who understand that, because we had so much success bringing it to festivals because, like I said, founder market fit is perfect there. And that's what you need when you're initially going to market. But there's a lot for us to learn about how parents think, and especially how 5-year-olds use devices like this.
One question regarding the work before I
Mm-hmm.
wrap up. But are you scared that you know you have been targeting a festival youth, like people going to the concerts and so on? Like crafted a young generation that are going to
Hmm.
concert. But now you're talking about parents, which is a different segment because
Hmm.
they would be buying for their kids probably. Does that scare you to be talking to now to another segment? For example, I mean, for those people, for young people, sometimes when parents buy it for themselves, they might not like it. And it's
Hmm.
not suddenly very cool.
It's not
Does that
cool.
scare
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
I would say it scares me, but it's a real consideration, and it's the reason that we haven't done too much of it thus far. Because, like you mentioned, they are pretty different demographics. I wouldn't expect any content aimed at parents to do that. Excuse me, to do that well on our social media, for example, because although whenever we go viral, parents are all up in the comments. That's not necessarily the core of our followers and people who are engaging with us most often. So there is a lot to consider because we both come from marketing backgrounds and understand that the more different types of people and segments you're trying to appeal to, the greater the risk of becoming mildly interesting to many, but super compelling to none. But the interesting thing is that there's actually a surprising amount of overlap with it. There are many, many family friendly festivals all around the world. And many of these festival goers, the first thing they do as they grow up is they want to keep going, bring their kids along, involve them in that culture. But another thing that we realized as well is maybe the greatest use case of them all for these families is um, while talking to them, we learned that there are thousands upon thousands of family friendly festivals that don't just take place for a couple of days, they take place every single day of the year all around the world. And those are called amusement parks. An amusement park is basically a permanent stationary festival at all times. And so, as long as we stay focused on this entertainment aspect and it being this fun product that solves the problem, I think we can thread the needle very well. But it is a really important thing, and we're even working through those problems ourselves right now, particularly how do we adjust our product page so that we're not tanking our conversion rate with either or, but it's a little bit more appealing to parents than it is right now. There's definitely a lot of considerations to take into account.
Yeah, and I would highly suggest what you are doing is that focus on the muse, especially when you're in your marketing channels and communication channels,
Yes.
which is like website is a communication channel. A parent might find answers to the questions that she or he is seeking, and the young person is not asking those questions at all, but still
Hmm.
the marketing message should be focused on the muse, which is like probably like an 18-year-old going to a concert. Of course, parents would be buying for their 5 or 6 years olds, but still maybe the vibe and the energy and the communication is really focused on that 18-year-old concert goer,
Hmm.
vibrant young person. So
Yeah.
that might be a nice consideration to think. And this is why building brands is such a nice thing. And congratulations on this journey. It's
Thank
like
you.
I'm really proud of you, really.
Thank you so much. It's an interesting thing to think about this year, especially as we talk about marketing to the festivals, because this is going to be the first time that we're actually experiencing these in-person organic network effects that we've been banking on this entire time. We managed to get here to this point without really benefiting from any of them in person, but the reality is there are going to be tens of thousands of these at music festivals this year already, because that's what most people bought it for. And so I'm optimistic that the word of mouth, the just attraction to it, so many people, I mean, over 40 million people interacted with our content last year, just interacted with it. That 40 million people trickle down into about 200,000 followers, trickle down to about 25,000 email subscribers, trickle down to about, 6 or 7,000 people who bought bundles of totems for them and their people. So
Yeah.
the funnel is so massive that hopefully it being in those settings in such an eye-catching way, we can experience those network effects, and that can maybe help us bridge the gap as we make this very careful expansion and opening up a little bit more to be more inclusive.
My last question is, if I come over, you're in where were you in
We're in
Tennessee or no?
Tennessee,
Yeah.
yes. Tennessee.
If I
Hmm.
come to Tennessee, where are we going
Yeah.
to have coffee? What's your
Yes,
favorite
we
coffee
will.
place?
Nearby to here, I think my favorite place that I would love to take you to is called Frothy Monkey. It's right across the street from us here. So our office is in right in the heart of Southside Chattanooga, and um, Chattanooga had its heyday. I mean, it's kind of in a current heyday because they just it's the home of the world's first commercial quantum network, and they were one of the first cities in the country to provide fiber optic internet 10 years ago. But originally it was known for the trains, and there was a
Mm-hmm.
very famous song in the early 1900s called the Chattanooga Choo Choo. And so there's this huge train station there that's kind of the iconic venue of Chattanooga. It's now turned into a hotel. And there's several pretty cool restaurants within that. And Frothy Monkey is a very vibey place. Great food, great coffee. The only thing is, a lot of people love it, so they're almost always out of something on the menu. So we might need to come in with a contingency plan.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to seeing you there then.
Yes, I would
Thanks so much
love
for
to
joining.
host you at Frothy Monkey Eater, and thank you for having me.